Was Edward II truly a king, or just a puppet dancing to the tune of his favorites? Did Roger Mortimer ever truly trust the man who'd elevated him, or was it always a carefully calculated game? Ireland burned, Scotland threatened, and a court at Westminster simmered with ambition, all while a single, brilliant man quietly built a kingdom of his own. Let's unravel the story of Roger Mortimer, a man who redefined power in 14th century England. The year is 1315. A blizzard howled across Ireland, mirroring the chaos gripping the English throne. Edward II, a king more known for his fondness for handsome young men than for strategic brilliance, had appointed Roger Mortimer as Deputy Justiciar, a role that sounded grand but felt more like a glorified errand boy. Mortimer, fresh off a disastrous campaign in Ireland, was tasked with quelling rebellions, collecting taxes, and generally keeping the unruly Irish from raiding the English border. It was a thankless job, a proving ground for a man who tasted defeat and desperately needed a win. He arrived in Dublin, a city choked with mud, suspicion, and the lingering scent of battle, to find a kingdom teetering on the brink. His first few months were a brutal education. He faced armed resistance, treacherous Irish chieftains, and a king who seemed more interested in chasing pretty boys than issuing orders. Mortimer, however, possessed a ruthless efficiency. He wasn't a charismatic leader, not one for rousing speeches or inspiring loyalty through grand gestures. He was a calculating strategist, a master of logistics, and a man who understood the value of fear. He imposed harsh taxes, brutally suppressed uprisings, and systematically dismantled the Scottish influence in the region. He didn't win hearts and minds, he won obedience. Then, almost overnight, everything changed. Edward Bruce, the Scottish Wolf of the Isles, seized the opportunity presented by his father's weakness and launched a full-scale invasion. Suddenly, Mortimer wasn't just suppressing Irish rebels, he was battling a determined Scottish army. The Battle of Faughart in 1315 became legendary, a crushing English victory that shattered Bruce's hopes and secured Mortimer's reputation. He didn't just win a battle, he delivered the head of Edward Bruce to Edward II, a trophy that solidified Mortimer's position and earned him the grudging respect of the king. But the victory was a double-edged sword. Edward predictably tried to claim all the glory for himself. He attempted to seize control of Mortimer's gains, demanding a larger share of the spoils and attempting to undermine his authority. Mortimer, however, was not one to be easily dismissed. He cleverly maneuvered, securing royal grants, consolidating his power, and subtly positioning himself as the true power behind the throne. Back in Dublin, Mortimer wasn't just a military commander, he was a shrewd administrator. He issued charters, granted manors, and established a system of governance that favored his own family and loyal supporters. He was building a network of influence, a web of connections that would serve him well in the years to come. He even dusted off his family's past, securing a manor for Hugh de Turpington, a loyal retainer who'd been overlooked for years. It was a calculated move, a display of generosity designed to reward loyalty and solidify his base of support. The court at Westminster, however, was a different beast altogether. It was a viper's nest of ambition, intrigue, and simmering resentment. Edward II was surrounded by a coterie of sycophantic favorites, William de Montagu, Roger d'Amory, and Hugh Despenser, men who were more interested in lining their own pockets than serving the king. These men, collectively known as the favorites, held the king's ear, manipulating his decisions and effectively controlling the government. They were, in short, a disaster waiting to happen. Enter Lancaster. The Earl of Lancaster, Edward II's cousin, was a man of formidable intellect, military prowess, and a deep-seated sense of entitlement. He believed he was owed a greater role in the governance of England, and he wasn't shy about voicing his displeasure. The situation quickly escalated into a bitter feud, fueled by political maneuvering, personal animosity, and the king's blatant disregard for the traditional rights of the nobility. Lancaster, backed by powerful allies like Pembroke and Battlesmere, began to challenge the king's authority, demanding that the favorites be removed from court and that the government be brought under proper control. Edward predictably refused. He was a weak and easily swayed ruler, utterly dependent on the approval of his favorites. The stage was set for a civil war, a conflict that threatened to tear England apart. It was in this chaotic environment that Mortimer began to quietly build his own power base. He recognized that the only way to secure his position was to distance himself from the king and cultivate alliances with the more influential figures at court. He skillfully exploited the tensions between Edward and Lancaster, offering his support to both sides while subtly maneuvering to position himself as a neutral arbiter. He was a master of deception, a man who could say one thing to one person and another thing to another. The arrival of papal envoys in 1317 offered a glimmer of hope for reconciliation between Edward and Lancaster. But the king, blinded by his infatuation with his favorites, quickly squandered the opportunity, leading to a renewed confrontation with his cousin. Pembroke and Battlesmere, recognizing the danger, stepped in to mediate, attempting to forge a compromise that would avert a full-blown civil war. Mortimer, meanwhile, played his own game. He shrewdly aligned himself with the elder statesmen, offering his services as a negotiator and a mediator. He was a valuable asset, a man of intelligence, experience, and a proven ability to handle difficult situations. He was also crucially loyal to Pembroke and Battlesmere, recognizing that their support was essential to his own survival. The negotiations dragged on for months, punctuated by setbacks and near breakdowns. But Mortimer remained steadfast, patiently working behind the scenes to secure a favorable outcome. He understood that the key to his success was to maintain his independence from the king, while simultaneously cultivating alliances with the most powerful figures at court. Then, in April 1318, Edward II abruptly summoned Mortimer back to England. The king, sensing that his grip on power was slipping, was attempting to regain control of his affairs. Mortimer, however, saw this as an opportunity. He used the summons as a pretext to consolidate his position, appointing William Fitzjohn, Archbishop of Cashel, to govern in his absence and meticulously preparing for his return. Upon his return, Mortimer didn't waste time. He swiftly dealt with the de Lacys, a family that had consistently defied him and harbored a deep-seated grudge against his family. John de Lacy, the son of either Walter or Hugh, was imprisoned in Dublin and subjected to a gruesome death, starved to death in Trim Castle. It was a brutal act of revenge, but it sent a clear message to anyone who dared to oppose him. As Edward Bruce continued his raids into northern England, Mortimer's role grew increasingly important. He orchestrated a final campaign to Drogheda, securing the region and effectively crushing the last vestiges of Scottish influence in Ireland. He was master of Southern Ireland, a position of immense power and prestige. But Mortimer's ambition extended far beyond Ireland. He recognized that the true key to his long-term security lay in England, and he began to quietly consolidate his influence at court. He was appointed to the Royal Council, a position that gave him a direct line of communication with the king and a voice in the government. He was also entrusted with reforming the royal household, a task that allowed him to exert further control over the king's finances and personnel. The marriage of his daughter Maud to John de Charlton, Lord of Powys, further strengthened his family's position, creating a powerful alliance with a family that had been long-standing rivals of the de Lacys. As 1318 drew to a close, Mortimer found himself at the center of a complex web of alliances and intrigues. He had achieved a remarkable transformation, rising from a defeated deputy just a few years earlier to become one of the most powerful men in England. He had mastered the art of political maneuvering, exploiting the weaknesses of his enemies and cultivating the loyalty of his allies, but his success had not gone unnoticed. Edward II, increasingly suspicious of Mortimer's growing power, began to plot against him. The king's favorites, resentful of Mortimer's influence, actively undermined his efforts to consolidate his position. The final act of Mortimer's story was a tragic one. In December 1318, he sailed for Wales, seeking to secure his family's holdings and prepare for a potential confrontation with the king, but his journey was cut short. He died suddenly at the age of 38, leaving behind a legacy of ambition, ruthlessness, and ultimately, betrayal. His death plunged England into a period of chaos and uncertainty. Edward II, emboldened by Mortimer's demise, continued to indulge his favorites and disregard the traditional rights of the nobility. The seeds of civil war were sown, and in 1326, Edward II was overthrown and murdered, ushering in a new era of instability and bloodshed, but Mortimer's legacy endured. He had demonstrated that power could be seized and maintained through intelligence, ruthlessness, and a willingness to exploit any opportunity. He was a master strategist, a brilliant negotiator, and a man who had redefined the role of the Deputy Justiciar. His story is a reminder that in the turbulent world of medieval politics, survival often depended on a combination of cunning, ambition, and a healthy dose of ruthlessness. And so, as the dust settles on the tale of Roger Mortimer, one question remains: did he truly achieve greatness, or was he merely a ruthless opportunist who exploited the weaknesses of his enemies and ultimately brought about his own downfall? Was he a visionary who shaped the destiny of England, or simply a calculating schemer who manipulated the king and his courtiers for his own personal gain? The answer, perhaps, lies somewhere in between.